minutes, and y'all have a draft.
Yes. I make a motion that we approve the minutes as written.
All in favor?
Aye.
And the second thing, we're going to turn it over to Mr. Setzer for some training.
Yes. I'm just doing the roll here for Chad.
I just realized Chad wasn't here.
I don't know about you, Frank.
So I'm doing the stuff for the minutes for him. Yeah, what we're going to do today is, remember back in January, the town went through our planning budget. We purchased the UNC School of Government's library webinars for planning continuing ed, which we've got access for the whole year. And since today we really didn't have nothing on the agenda, thought it was best we just maybe go through one of these. We thought last time meeting we discussed if we had something that was a slow month, we may do this, and so we're catch up on some training. So I'm just going to go through. It's about 38 minutes, and it should get sound through all the audio on it of the screens, and it stops each one. So if we've got questions after each slide, we can ask and take time and ask questions. A few questions have been going on, and I'll add in some stuff showing how we do it in town and stuff. And this one is done by David Owens, who's the head professor for the School of Government for Public Law and Government. He was actually, when I did my training, he was the main instructor when I was down there.
Welcome to this module on amending local development regulations. My name is David Owens, and I'm a professor at the School of Government at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. To navigate through this module, you can use the left-hand navigation or the play bar that appears below. This module was made possible by the generous support of the Risk Management Division of the North Carolina League of Municipalities. This is one in a series of modules on land development regulations. You can review a complete list of the modules available by clicking on the link on the slide. This module reviews how local government boards adopt, amend, and repeal development regulations, with a particular focus on amending the zoning ordinance. While we will focus on amendments, all of the legal requirements we will review also apply to the initial adoption and to the repeal of a development regulation. After completing this module, you'll understand how ordinance amendments are initiated, the role of the planning board in review of proposed amendments, requirements for advertising and conducting public hearings, factors that can and cannot be considered for decisions, and voting requirements for governing boards making these decisions. Let's use a typical rezoning case to illustrate the points we'll cover in this module. Here's the case we'll use. Meet Melanie, a local real estate developer. She has recently acquired a 10-acre tract in Normalton. The lot is vacant. Most of the land around the tract is occupied by single-family homes. However, one side of the property is bounded by Main Street, a major city street. Melanie's parcel is a mile or so out from downtown, but the street has a fair amount of commercial development between this lot and downtown. Melanie thinks her property is ideally suited for commercial development. She would like to build a large grocery store along with space for several smaller businesses, such as restaurants, banks, and perhaps a service station. The site, like most of the surrounding land, has long been zoned R15, a single-family residential district. In order to build her project, the site would need to be rezoned to B3, Normalton's general commercial zoning district. So Melanie has submitted the paperwork to rezone the site from R15 to B3.
After each one, if you have questions or something, just holler and I'll, before I get the next one. You hear it, Bobby?
by the local government itself. The local government staff, the planning board, or even the governing board may start the process to consider an amendment. Most rezoning petitions are initiated by a landowner seeking to change the range of uses permitted on the property. Other interested parties, such as the real estate community or neighborhood groups, may also propose amendments. For the most part, state law only addresses the process that must be followed in considering a proposed amendment, rather than specifying how the process could be started. It is permissible for a local government to require that proposals to rezone property or otherwise amend the ordinance be made on forms provided by the city or county. These forms assure that basic information about the proposal is available from the very outset of the process. It is also permissible to charge an application fee. The fee must be no higher than a reasonable estimate of the administrative cost to process the application. For example, the local government can consider the cost that will be incurred in advertising and conducting a public hearing, or in securing needed technical analysis of the proposal, and can set an appropriate fee to offset those costs. Once a complete application is in hand and any required processing fees have been paid, the local government starts the process to review the proposed amendment. The local government staff usually prepares a report analyzing the proposal and schedules moving the proposal through the review process. An initial step in mandatory procedures that must be followed is a review by the planning board. State law requires that cities and counties submit all proposed zoning text and map amendments to the planning board for review. The planning board must be given up to 30 days for this review, but they can report on a recommendation earlier than this. If no recommendation is made within 30 days of referral to the planning board, the governing board is then free to proceed without a recommendation. Planning board review of other development regulations may be required by local ordinance, but it is mandated by the state only for zoning amendments. There is no state requirement for a public hearing by the planning board. Some local ordinances require a formal hearing before the planning board, or a joint public hearing before the planning board and governing board. But it is more common for the planning board to receive public comments informally during a regular meeting of the planning board, rather than holding a formal hearing. The typical process at the planning board meeting starts with the staff briefly summarizing the proposal and the applicant explaining why they are seeking the amendment. The staff reports on their analysis and may offer a recommendation. Members of the public who wish to comment are generally allowed to do so. Then the planning board members discuss the matter and vote on a recommendation to the governing board. There are a couple of legal requirements about the planning board review that must be met. First, the planning board must make a written comment to the governing board. The written statement must be presented to the governing board prior to the governing board vote on the matter. So including the statement only in planning board minutes that are prepared and approved after the governing board meeting is insufficient. The written statement from the planning board must be before the governing board at the time that board acts on the matter. Second, the planning board statement must address plan consistency. The planning board must identify all adopted plans that are relevant and let the governing board know whether the proposal is consistent with those plans. Some states require that zoning amendments be consistent with the plan. That is not required in North Carolina. But the planning board and the governing board are both required to consider the plan and not consistent with the plan. The plan consistency statement does not have to be long and exhaustive, but it must be more than a simple checkoff. It must describe how the proposal is consistent or not. The statement may also address other matters deemed important by the planning board. For example, since the governing board has to address whether the amendment is reasonable and in the public interest, the planning board can identify and discuss factors that will help make those determinations. There is no requirement for a positive recommendation from the planning board in order for the potential amendment to move forward. The planning board recommendation is advisory only. The only legal requirements are that the statement be in writing, that it be presented to the governing board before they act, and that it address plan consistency.
So, we're talking about the, must be more than just a checkoff. That's what I always ask for. Answers more than yes and no. We do a recommendation sheet. We've always got our questions, and we go through it. It talks about consistency and, harmony with the neighborhood and so on. So that's what we're doing. That's our written statement right there. Those questions with the recommendation at the bottom. That's our written statement. But need that detail. This stated it can't be just a check off. Yes or no. That's why I always urge to get a little more in depth of why it's consistent or why it's in public interest and so on.
Let's take a look at how these requirements played out with Melanie's rezoning request. The planning board discussed the proposal at a regular scheduled meeting. Melanie, her planner and traffic consultant, city staff, and 4 neighbors presented comments. The board concluded that some of the policies in the Normalton Comprehensive Plan supported the project. Policies encouraging more dense developments to be located along major roads, and those supporting increased commercial development within town. Other policies tended to point the other way. Policies on maintaining the residential character of established neighborhoods and limiting the traffic impacts of new development. The board decided to pass that analysis along to the city council without resolving whether the project would or would not be consistent with the plan. A majority of the planning board then voted to recommend denial of the rezoning, based primarily on neighborhood opposition. Since the planner was leaving town the next day for a much-needed vacation and would not be around to write up the planning board action prior to the council meeting, the planning board chair volunteered to go to the council meeting and present the board's recommendation. Which of the following statements about the planning board review of Melanie's rezoning request is true? 1. The analysis of plan consistency is inadequate because a description of how plan policies are implicated is insufficient. The board must come to a yes or no conclusion on plan consistency. 2. The city council must deny the rezoning based on the planning board's recommendation for denial. 3. An oral report on planning board review is inadequate. The board's analysis and recommendation must be in writing when presented to the city council. On the next slide, you'll be asked a question regarding this rezoning request, and when you submit your answer by clicking the Submit button, you will receive feedback. When you're ready to move to start the quiz, select the Continue button on the slide.
This is oral. This is an oral quiz. It's C is the one that's true, right, Justin? Or do you want us to do this?
Well, I'll do it.
You have to do
You
it.
tell me which one you want me
Because
to
B
do.
is false.
It kind of stated that the
An
board
oral
didn't come to
report is
conclusions.
inadequate.
Still
That's
move
true.
forward.
In the 30 days.
All right, C. C's the one that's true. Am I right or not? Or not right? I may be wrong, but I think it's C.
The first 2 statements, A and B,
Hey,
are incorrect. An analysis of how the rezoning would meet some plan policies but not others is sufficient for the plan consistency statement. The council council must have and consider the planning board recommendation, but it is not bound by that recommendation. Thus, the correct answer is C. An oral report is not sufficient, as the planning board comment must be put in writing and delivered to the council. This comment must address plan consistency.
You may continue with the module by selecting continue on your screen.
So for consistency, we didn't agree on everything.
A vital part,
As far as the consistency was, we could still send that forward with our reasoning, and the board could move on one way or the other.
Yeah, they can still deny, or just to say, you're still advisory board. That's why they can, you could vote to approve something, and they could vote to deny, or vice versa, either way. Which is, generally, they pretty much, probably 95% of the time, I've seen that much go with what this board gives them. But,
There's
they
been
have
times
there
that
have
they've
been
gone
times.
another way.
Yeah.
Well, I think if they had a room full of people opposing it, that might not, that might consider,
Well, I mean, yeah.
you know.
But we don't have to be 100% in agreement. It's all consistent. We could have a gray area and just send it forward to them.
Yeah, it could be a 4-3 vote, too. I mean, it still approves. It don't have to be a 7-0 vote.
part of the development regulation amendment process is the public hearing. Other means of securing public comment are certainly allowed, but a formal hearing is mandated by the statutes. State law also mandates specific notice of the public hearing that must be held for legislative decisions to adopt, amend, or repeal a local development regulation. A local ordinance can add additional notice requirements, but it must at a minimum meet these state requirements. State law mandates that an advertisement for the hearing must be published twice in separate weeks, with the first notice at least 10 but not more than 25 days prior to the hearing. This published notice must appear in a newspaper of general circulation. Putting the notice in an advertising circular or a homeowner's newsletter is not sufficient. The published hearing notice is required for all proposed amendments to any local development regulation, rezonings and amendments to the text of any development regulation. A couple of additional hearing notice requirements are necessary for proposed zoning map amendments.
As you all know, all they do is we have, before it goes to set the hearing, we have to run the ad in the Franklin Press twice, so on. We have to do that every time for map amendments, or text amendments, or special use permit. Every time we have to go and run those.
For zoning map amendments, a notice of the hearing must be mailed to the owners of the affected and the abutting properties. The notice must be mailed to whoever is identified by the county tax records as owners of the property being rezoned, and all property that abuts or touches the property. An updated title search to determine whether the property has changed hands since the tax listing is not required. This mailed notice must be sent first